Ska jag gå upp? Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to this now third day of World Water Week. Time flies by when you're having fun, as they say. But welcome in particular to this morning's high-level panel on the follow-up to the UN 2023 Water Conference. 2023 has been, and still is, a milestone year for water. And World Water Week is really at a midway point between the UN Water Conference that took place in March, the 2023 High-Level Political Forum in July, and of course upcoming the UN SDG Summit and the COP meeting later in the year. And maintaining this momentum in between these milestones and following up on these events is key for the success of their outcomes. And World Water Week can really have a role in keeping the momentum going. So providing this continuity, and I would even say this continuous pressure to act, is critical. SIWI has actively made the choice to engage in supporting the outcomes of the 2023 UN Water Conference. The annual nature of World Water Week, combined with a broad participation, and we're seeing this this morning as well, from many sectors, many communities, with its really genuinely inclusive nature, which goes beyond diversity. World Water Week really wants to offer this space that could and should be strategically used to advance the commitments that have been made in 2023. It's time to walk the talk and find those common pathways to tackle the water crisis. Today's high-level panel, co-convened by SIWI and the Kingdom of the Netherlands, will discuss and deep dive into the themes of the UN Water Conference and specifically the Water Action Agenda. This event will be co-moderated by Arati Davis, the CEO of Sweden-India Business Council, and Claudia Prehn from the International Water Association's Young Water Professional Steering Committee. Co-moderated and including really a representative from the youth to really make sure that we hear those voices. Let me also say that we're not here to point fingers at unfulfilled commitments. This is not a blame game. That's really not the purpose. We're here to discuss and facilitate conversations that can form and shape and identify those necessary collaborations between governments, non-state actors, academia, and private sector. So this event is really intended to offer a space to find solutions to operationalize the Water Action Agenda. So we'll be hearing on progress of smaller, successful commitments and how to scale and or replicate those and the implementation of those. SIWI, and you've heard me say this before, but is really committed to make the World Water Week an annual moment for participants to review, align, join forces, and accelerate action on the commitments that were registered in the Water Action Agenda. And really to share those solutions that have been found and that can be upscaled. So without further ado, I would now want to invite on stage and having the pleasure to hear directly from Henk Ovink, the former Special Envoy from the Netherlands, and Sultan Rahim Zoda, Special Envoy of the President of the Republic of Tajikistan on water and climate. And we will be hearing from the two brothers in arms about the follow-up to the UN conference and the connected interactive dialogues to come. So, I think we said that we would have one on each side, so please. So Henk, can you maybe briefly set the scene on the outcomes of the UN Water Conference, the follow-up steps that have already been taken, and what still needs to be done?
Thank you, Karin. And they asked me to stay to script, which for me is always a challenge when we start to talk about water. First of all, compliments to SIWI and yourself and the team at World Water Week for organizing such an amazing World Water Week and hosting us post the UN conference. Thank you, Sultan. We were partners, became friends, and we're family, we're brothers in this good cause for water. Thank you, Csaba Korosi, President of the General Assembly, already talking to water and the outcomes yesterday, but championing water across the UN system. And thank you, I would say, to all of you for being these amazing partners in the run-up to the water conference, at the conference itself, and now, and perhaps this is a little bit the challenging part, you're still partners. 151 days after the conference, there are, you could say, two sides of what came next. One, over 800 commitments. Private sector, government, cities, investors, NGOs, individuals, academia, communities, you name it, we got it in this water action agenda. Commitments aimed at changing course and the world for water security. But at the same time, out of the conference was also a critical call to the UN, step up and act and lead with us. And 151 days after that, there is still silence from the UN system. And I think we count on you too to call on the UN to take action. They promised a home for water at the UN. They promised a strengthened UN water as a coordination mechanism. And they promised, upon our call, a UN water envoy. This triangle effort of leadership from the UN is needed yesterday in the lead-up to the SDG summit, the COP, and anything else, but more importantly, in the lead-up to actions on the ground. So that call should also come from us. But I must say, we're happy, the government of the Netherlands, Tajikistan and Senegal, and I want to thank the government of Senegal, who's represented here too, to lead the resolution process where we will actually focus on those four things. Anchor water in everything UN, from an SDG summit to a COP. Strengthen the UN system so it can act and lead on water. Follow up on the water action agenda in a transparent, accountable way so we can make sure that we learn, that we scale and replicate for the impact that we need. And fourth, there has to be a follow-up. We have to come together again in the context of the UN. We can't wait another 40 plus years. It has to move faster. And this is the agenda we set forward. We're partnering with our partners, the co-chairs of the interactive dialogues too, the President of the General Assembly, of course the Netherlands and Tajikistan, in the partnership with Senegal. And we count on you to let your voice be heard in New York, across the world, of course on the ground, but also to make sure that we move towards institutional action so much needed.
Thank you. Thank you, Henk, for those insights and that pressure, including on the UN system to act. Sultan, how do we drive the water action agenda together?
I would like to start also with echoing my brother Henk appreciation, to thank also all of those who contributed to the success of the UN Water Conference. We were honored to co-host this historical event and are proud that with the support of the world community, we could make it a real watershed moment for the world. But indeed, it is not enough. Since the beginning of the preparatory process, we were thinking and talking about the importance of the follow-up actions to ensure the long-term success of this historical event. My dear brother Henk has already mentioned about the importance of the continuity, responsibility, and accountability. And he's right that we don't have another 40, 50 years to wait. So in line with also phrasing from the Hank's speech that the urgency is clear and the agenda is there, I would like to add that we are here. We are here today to unite our efforts for implementation, for transformation of our commitments we made during the conference, collected in the Water Action Agenda, into real action. And we are pleased to mention that now we have so many countries and partners championing water.
The building, I think that was excellent, so thank you so much for that and for understanding that these are circumstances completely beyond our control. I can also be very reassuring, there was no fire. There were ovens in the kitchen that produced too much smoke. The room has been ventilated, so maybe lunch is at risk for today, but otherwise I think we're okay. So you can be assured, no reason to worry and to be concerned about that. This is an interesting turn of events for a water conference and a discussion on the UN. I think maybe we can blame it on Henk, who really put the house on fire, pushing the UN to act and to act with a sense of urgency. But let me resume where we were, and we will continue the session as planned. So we have lost a little bit of time, we will run over time, and the whole schedule for the day will be postponed, so no worries about that. So Sultan, in the middle of the sentence, I had asked you a question. How do we drive the Water Action Agenda together?
Yeah, thank you. Again, I would like to join Hank's messages and thanks to everybody for their great contribution to the success of the UN 2023 Water Conference. We, Tajikistan and the Netherlands, were honored to co-host this historical event and are proud that with the great support of the world community, we could make this conference a real world watershed moment. But indeed, the question, is it enough? Indeed not. Since the beginning of the preparatory process, we have been communicating, thinking and talking about the importance of the follow-up actions, which should ensure the long-term success. So, my dear brother Hank has already mentioned about the importance of the continuity, responsibility, and accountability, and he's right, basically, and we don't have another 40, 50 years to wait. And now we are here today to unite our efforts for the implementation, for the transformation of all those commitments we made during the conference collected in the Water Action Agenda into real action on the ground. And we are pleased to mention today that so many champions are on the board, so many partners, so many UN member states are collaborating for the implementation of the outcomes of the UN 2023 Water Conference. So Senegal joined Tajikistan and the Netherlands to co-facilitate the new UNGA resolution about the follow-up of the conference. UAE has invited Tajikistan and the Netherlands to co-lead the water work stream of COP28, and we are working now together to have stronger voice and position of water in the agenda of COP28. So UN Water put Water Action Agenda at the center of the discussion in their meeting last week here in Stockholm. So Stockholm World Water Week is providing a real good platform for discussion of the follow-up ways among the different stakeholders. So, and there are a lot of other things going on. On Sunday, we had here in Stockholm also the meeting of the International Advisory Committee of the Dushanbe process, and where we widely discuss how to best ensure the follow-up of the UN 2023 conference using the platform of the Dushanbe Water Conference. And the advisory committee You both were there, decided to organize the session of the conference in line or corresponding to the themes of the interactive dialogues with the great focus, the main focus to the implementation of the Water Action Agenda. So, but again, is it enough? Not. We have SDG Summit ahead of us. We have the Summit of the Future next year in New York. And we have to unite our efforts now to place water in the agenda of these summits, as well as in the outcomes of this summit. Because there is no future without water. It is source of our life. It deserves to be duly valued and respected, now and forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Sultan, and thank you for putting us all, I think, under pressure, and also for daring to be disruptive. And I think we need to be disruptive, and this forum, this platform, allows each and every one of us to be disruptive. So I think it is important to recognize that sense of urgency and come together to act. That's where the Water Action Agenda is all about. So thank you. Thank you, Henk. Thank you, Sultan. An interesting opening of a high-level panel, but I was delighted to see outside in the parking lot, lots of those informal bilateral discussions actually taking place. So, you know, maybe that half hour triggered some action and some deals and some agreements. So happy to see that. That's exactly what World Water Week is all about. And now I am inviting the two co-moderators to come on stage for the continuation of the high-level panel. Thank you very much, Sultan and Henk.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Arati Davis, and I will be your co-moderator for today's high-level panel.
Hello, I'm Claudia Pren, and I will be your co-moderator during this panel as well.
And we are working together because one of the points of the Water Action Agenda is bringing in new voices and intergenerational working. So Claudia and I are also new acquaintances and now friends.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I invite all of you to continue these discussions during the week and later on, so we can have an actual action agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. So to start our high-level panel, I welcome to the stage Dr. Joachim Harlan, Chief Freshwater Unit UNEP and Chief Manager UNEP DHI Center on Water, Environment and Ecosystems to give us a follow-up on the UN Action Agenda in 2023.
Thank you very much. I thought it was very interesting with this fire alarm. It's like a call to action, and we all walked out and we walked the talk, and this, I think, is what we want to do also with our Water Action Agenda. Henk, you said that there's been complete silence from the UN system since the conference. I couldn't resist. I have to challenge that. So I'm here speaking on behalf of UN Water. I coordinate the expert group on Agenda 2030, and we in UN Water, since the conference, have published a synthesis report, which we call a blueprint for acceleration. And that captures many of the main outcomes of the conference, but it also provides a blueprint, you could say, for action for different stakeholders, including the UN system itself. So what we've been doing is, since the conference, we have looked at how can we follow up and support the Water Action Agenda. We have discussed how to advance the SDG 6 acceleration framework process. We have discussed how can we support UN Water Envoy, how can we also support and inform intergovernmental meetings, how can we strengthen our own water programs, how can we mainstream water into all relevant intergovernmental processes, and we, at the meeting that we had here in Stockholm just before the conference, decided that we will develop a UN system-wide strategy on water and sanitation and also organize regular meetings with our executive heads. All right, so there we have some action that has happened, Henk, so we're trying. Now to what I was supposed to talk about. I was asked to say a few words about synergies and perhaps gaps in the Water Action Agenda. So starting off with synergies, I think the Water Action Agenda has the potential to bring different stakeholders from the water community together, including, as we heard, from governments, from international organizations, the UN, business, civil society, and so forth. And this could help to build a more coordinated and coherent effort and response to the water challenges. I see that there's a big potential there. We can also help to mainstream water into other processes, as, for example, within biodiversity, disaster risk reduction, climate change, energy and food discussions, and so on. So there's a large potential for synergies. But we can also see that there are some gaps. And in the synthesis report that I mentioned, we have also reported on a quick assessment that was done by WRI shortly after the conference. And here are some of the findings of that assessment of more than 800 voluntary commitments. So on the topic of finance, we see that 26% of these commitments have an identified clear source of financing, only 26%. And only 20% of the commitments have quantifiable objective targets and how to measure success and in the evaluation. Only 24% of the commitments are addressing climate change, and only about 12% of the commitments are addressing agriculture, and 6% on industry, and these are the largest consumers of water globally. So we see there's more to be done here. But we know also that this water action agenda is still in early stages of its development, and it's not quite yet clear how it's going to be implemented and funding, and that's why we're here talking together. And we hope that this water action agenda will be very inclusive, and that we will not see a situation where it's dominated by a few countries or a few organizations. Now, secondly, there was a need to talk about what conversations need to be held. So I thought about that, and I thought that, okay, what can we talk about here? We can talk about how can we ensure that the water action agenda is inclusive and equitable. Obviously, how can we scale it up and make it implementable, but in doing so, making it inclusive and equitable. How can we be responsive to the needs of vulnerable water user groups, including women, children, and poor people? How can we make sure and monitor and to see that it is implemented effectively? We need a reporting and follow-up mechanism, and that's what has been suggested also in the conference. We need some kind of regular, periodic, intergovernmental review process and dialogue. And we need the water action agenda to be supported by adequate financing and resources, and we need to align it also with other processes. So these are some things that we can discuss today and how we can make that happen. I think it's a very promising initiative, and it's pleased to see that this is happening. We're trying to walk the talk, but we also have to be open and honest about it, and we need to seriously look at how we can actually make this a reality and not just something that we've put up online. So the UN Water Synthesis Report that I mentioned initially, it does provide a blueprint for acceleration, and it does provide concrete actions on how we can go about it and make it happen. So I recommend that you take a look at that, and by working together, we can ensure that the Water Action Agenda will be successful and to help advance SDG 6. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Open and honest conversation, recognizing where we've come from and what we need to do in the future. Yesterday, we had the pleasure of having Dr. Shaba Qureshi, President of the UN General Assembly, talk to us about very much this, and we are so honored to have him back with us today to give us a bridge between the Water Action Agenda and the SDGs.
Thank you very much, Arti, and many, many thanks to all my friends and colleagues who have just spoken and opened the open and frank conversation. I would like to join, and will respond to, similarly to Joachim, to Henk and Sultan, to what has been said. But first, what might be the similarities and what might be the lessons learned from the Water Conference to the SDG Summit. And the SDG Summit will be one of the most important events in the United Nations of the year. And it will have to be a transformative and non-conventional summit meeting. How the SDG Summit can benefit from the Water Conference? In 3 ways, I think. There will be similarities in format, content, and strategy. Let me mostly focus on the content and strategy. Both events are about breakthrough. Both events are about transformation. If we do not use this opportunity for transformation and breakthrough, then we are going to miss the opportunity to achieve the SDG goals. So there might be a couple of points I would like to offer to your kind attention. What unites the two events? First, realistic stock taking and addressing the knowledge gap. We did it in March. We have to do it in September for the SDGs as well. We know that in the case of water, about 2/3 of the SDG 6 targets have only data, adequate data. For the rest, we do not have enough data and our knowledge is just approximate. In the case of the SDGs, we are probably in a more severe situation, and the level of implementation of the targets are mostly off track. About 12% of the targets are on track in the implementation. So there is a lot to be learned from the water experience and a lot to be done. The second, we need a renewed narrative, a new dynamics, and that could be also borrowed from the Water Conference. At the Water Conference, we understood how to manage better, value, and protect water. We understood that we needed a new economics on water, and it is being developed, and something similar must be developed during and after the SDG Summit for the new economics on sustainability. 3, the role of commitments and game changers. Commitments for the SDG Summit, it will be about recommitting ourselves. Those 3 minutes which will be allotted to a leader of a country will not be enough to make political grandstandings, will not be designed to make long, big speeches. It will be just enough to make very factual commitments. And that will be recorded. That's what we've done in the form of Water Action Agenda, and that what is should be followed up now. Game changers. Because we know that if we are way off track, and half of the time allotted for the implementation of the SDGs is up already, it is not enough to do the same just a little bit faster. We need to change speed, we need to change gear, and we need to change direction in many cases. We need to change the game. And that is the main task of the SDG Summit. Similarly, as we tried to do the game changers, which are a kind of derivative of the Water Action Agenda that we came up at the end of the Water Conference. Transformation-focused conference. As I mentioned, the most important outcome of the Water Conference was that we recommitted ourselves to a major transformation in a very short period of time. Something similar must be done now in the case of the SDGs. Let me give you some very concrete observations, what needs to be looked at. What we learned during the Water Conference, one of the most important issues was integration. how to integrate water and climate policies, how to integrate water, food, energy production. The integration approach will be absolutely pivotal in the case of the summit, SDG summit. Second, addressing the dependency of the food, energy, and water consumption. If we can bring it together with health, with some other areas in the SDG summit, we shall be much, much closer to the implementation of what we have committed ourselves to. Third, in the water conference, we understood that much of the implementation will have to be done at local, national, and regional levels. There are some issues that should be done at global levels. These are mostly the game changers, but the bulk of the actions must be done at local level, and that will be re-emphasized, hopefully, in September during the SDG summit. That also gives the possibility for the non-government actors to take a responsible role. We also made a step forward during the water conference of redefining financing principles. It is related to the rethinking of the new economics on water. We need to do something similar in the case of the implementation of the SDGs. The education system was given a major role in the water conference, and broadening our knowledge, broadening our understanding of the sustainability transformation will be key during the SDG summit in September. And last but not least, in the case of water conference, we emphasized that the validation of the implementation will be absolutely crucial. We need to create a new system of validation of the implementation of SDGs based on scientific evidence in the United Nations. Now some final lessons learned, and here would be my response, joining Joachim actually to what has been mentioned by Henk and Sultan. I'm thrilled very much that I hear Tajikistan and the Netherlands saying that there is a need of urgency. I fully agree. I'm very, very much enthusiastic about hearing that there is no more day, no more year to be lost. I share the sense of urgency. Let me just reiterate, before the water conference, we agreed, those leaders who were involved, including Tajikistan and the Netherlands, that the implementation would start on the day after the water conference. And there were two countries who volunteered to lead the implementation. It was Tajikistan and the Netherlands, and Senegal joined the third. I agree that we have lost 150 days. Please send the same message of urgency to your missions, who are now leading the negotiations, drafting the resolution. The resolution should not be about where and when the next water conference should be. The resolution should be about implementation of what has been agreed upon in the water conference. If we take these lessons learned for the SDG summit, it will be absolutely important, because we have only 7.5 years remained for the implementation of the Agenda 2030. On the next day of the SDG summit, we have to start the implementation of what has been agreed upon. So it's not the place, not the year, not the next conference. It is the action, it is the validation, and it is the investments. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We're going to go into discussions on the 5 IDs now, but just to summarize, I think the message that has been said loud and clear, implementation. That's where we need to go, that's what we need to do here, and that's why we are here. I call up on stage the panelists for the first ID, Water and Health, to join me on the couches. So we're going to start this segment with a short video from His Excellency Right Honourable Mr. Andrew Mitchell, Minister of State in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office from the United Kingdom, who is co-chairs for the Interactive Dialogue 1 together with the Dominican Republic.
A very good morning to you all. I am grateful to our hosts for bringing everyone together, and sorry that I cannot join you in person. This is an opportunity to build on the momentum we've generated towards our vital life-saving goals to make sure every global citizen has access to clean water, hygiene and sanitation by the end of the decade. The United Nations Water Conference earlier this year was a unifying moment, and the UK was honoured to co-chair the Water for Health Dialogue together with the Dominican Republic. It was an important discussion showcasing some brilliant examples of collaboration and political leadership. It also highlighted how many people remain vulnerable to disease outbreaks and the worsening consequences of climate change. We've made progress, but we have a long way to go. It was encouraging that almost 800 commitments were made as part of the Water Action Agenda, and that many of these pledged to strengthen WASH systems. To meet these commitments and Sustainable Development Goal number 6, we must now gear up our efforts both to increase funding in the sector and to secure new and varied sources of investment. One of Britain's commitments was a new £18.5 million programme, WASH Systems for Health. I am delighted to say this is now working with governments, civil society, and research organisations to help create sustainable climate-resilient water, sanitation and hygiene systems, where governments develop clear policy objectives to draw in investment and deliver for those most in need. The conference really boosted our efforts, and now is the time to step up the pace to deliver more systems that tick all those boxes. This means working even harder, strengthening our partnerships with governments, the private sector, and communities. This is how, together, we will reach our collective ambition to build a safer, cleaner, healthier world. Britain will continue playing our part in this all-important global effort. Thank you very much.
And with that, I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Mr. Paul Deverill, Senior Policy Advisor at Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, Government of UK. Ms. Hannah Brodsky, Precision Microbiome Engineering, PhD student at the University of North Carolina. And Ms. Lorian Brugia, Senior Water and Gender Program Specialist, UNESCO. Paul, with that video, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to ask you about leadership and governance. How do we get leadership and governance to focus on water and make it a political priority?
Okay, so thank you very much for the opportunity, and Minister Mitchell would have been really keen to have been here, and I reiterate his apologies. He can't, but he is a real champion for WASH and for water and for health. So in the time I have available, the short time, I'll have to use the C word, I'm afraid. This is about why leadership is needed. So the first C word I'm going to use is coverage, and we have friends here from JMP and GLAS, WHO, UNICEF, whose report really indicates the huge magnitude of the work that we have to do. Yet, I think 2.2 billion people lack access to safely managed water supplies, 3.5 billion lack access to sanitation, 2 billion people, these are huge figures here, lack access to hygiene. And last century, I'd have been worried if 400 million people lack access to any toilet, but that's what the situation is now. Yeah. So the coverage speaks volumes. It's massive. And one manifestation of that is another C word, cholera. We're far removed from cholera, maybe by time and maybe by place, but it has been an awful year for cholera, and what an indicator of lack of WASH and lack of WASH systems that really is, and the impact that has on health. And the last C word I use in this context, if I can, is not coverage. It's not that. It's going to be climate. Yeah, we hear about climate, and we see it in our pictures from New Zealand, from Canada, from Greece. Yeah, But the real impacts of climate change are being felt further south. And I think we really have to think about that. Now, given the magnitude of that lot, that's why we need leadership. But what sort of leadership are we looking for? Now, we've heard a lot about the UN, but really the sort of leadership we're looking for is in the countries which both host the problem and host the solution. Yeah? And that's not just high-level leadership, that's leadership you can find in families and communities, in districts, in healthcare facilities, in schools, and also in government. But not just at, the Minister for Water, the Minister of Sanitation. I'm afraid it's got to go beyond that, because that leadership is going to have to make some very hard decisions about change. The scope of the challenge means that we have to engage more also with heads of state.
I think that gives me a really good point to come to Hannah, because you created now the 3 C's. Coverage, cholera, climate change. We heard this morning about alignment, coming together. We cannot be fragmented if we're going to move forward. The UN Sea Health and Water Conference coming up is an opportunity to do this and move forward in the Water Action Agenda. What can we expect to see there?
Of course, thank you, Artie, and thank you to SIWI for having me. This is an honor to speak today. And just as Hank said, there needs to be a follow-up opportunity to this UN conference, and the UN Seawater and Health Conference is exactly that. From October 23rd to the 27th, from the Water Institute in North Carolina in the United States. This is a platform for partnership between local actors, scientists, politicians, and really decision makers in WASH to speak more in these conversations, to put planning to action, because at the end of the day, I speak this to all of you and all the local actors out there globally. What are commitments? They're really only words if we do not put action behind them. And the UN Seawater and Health Conference is a space for that, to really mobilize and put action and planning to these commitments.
When we talk about taking commitments forward, at the opening yesterday, there was a very strong call to action to say that if there's going to be a water metrics that we can stand by, it's that by 2030, no woman is carrying water on her head in the pictures that you see. Laura, I'm going to come to you for the reflection and the final question for the panel. From a gender perspective, how can we have an alternative focus in terms of how water can go forward?
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here, but also for bringing the gender aspect. We have been hearing of how millions and millions of people still having access to wash, secure water, sanitation, and considering the approach, so as gender, usually as an alternative perspective, I think it's time that we consider it as central. And the reasons are urgent, the reasons are obvious in some aspects. So the impact of not having safe water, safe wash, hygiene, sanitation for women causes so many distress and problems in their daily lives, but also that scales to societies. So this is something that we have been working in gender, working in water and women. We have been pointing at that urgency for some time now. But I think we still need to continue exploring more which are the interactions. For example, in this case that we are discussing on water, gender, health, employment, for example. We are not measuring properly which are those impacts, for example, in time, in lost opportunities for women to have a more meaningful role in public life, also at home, at school, in the societies. So this is something that we took seriously, and for the Water Action Agenda, we defined together with UNESCO World Water Assessment Program and a coalition of multiple parties. We include member states, academia, NGOs, different, also private sector. We called for accelerating this, and we defined 5 game changers that we included in the Water Action Agenda, and we took it so seriously that we are moving ahead with concrete actions. Next month, we are meeting for our first operational meeting to define our work plan. And we have this work plan until the completion of the 2030 agenda. And we have these 5 game changers, but also individual members have established their own commitments. And I invite you all to join this call for action. All the information is on the UNESCO WAP website, and we need all of us. We need all joining. We are increasing the number of member states and stakeholders engaging, but in a very, very slow pace. So again, for this to happen, for just closing this gender gap and to meet next time and start talking about how things are going better, we really need to act now, and I share the sense of urgency. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I think what we're talking about is disruption, breaking the bias, and actually bringing into focus what's actually been on the outskirts for a long time. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I'd like to, if you can join me in giving them a warm hand of applause.
Thanks. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm going to call on our next panel. We have Ms. Tanja Miskovia, Ambassador at Large for Water Diplomacy, Republic of Slovenia, on behalf of the European Union. Ms. Mary Beth Kot-Jetsen, Sustainability Senior Manager, PepsiCo. And Ms. Tanya Martina Cruz, Associate Researcher at University of Libre de Brussels. This is a beautiful panel, given where we left off in our last conversation. So Tanya, I'm going to start with you. From your work at the EU, what can intergovernmental entities do to progress water investment?
Well, for countries with difficult investment environment, it's the government and international donors that can help providing guarantees so that investors face reduced risks. And in the EU, we're doing that through the European Fund for Sustainable Development Plus, which is the financial tool to mobilize investments under the Global Gateway Initiative. The EU, of course, continues with its financial support and cooperation projects with UN member states and also at regional level with different instruments. We're putting EU taxonomy policies in place, enhanced disclosure rules for companies on water risks, etc. And we need to involve the private sector in policy making itself. Also to make sure that innovative ideas are shared. And here I would like to mention two examples. One is the Zero Pollution Stakeholder Platform, which is an active contributor in shaping the EU initiatives under the Zero Pollution Action Plan. And the second is the circular economy missions that we have been doing in many countries across the globe, bringing innovative EU companies to meet counterparts in partner countries to promote the circular economy transition. I'll stop here.
But Tanya, that's great, because I'm going to come to the private sector right next and ask PepsiCo, in terms of water sector and water investments, what would you like to see and what's coming out of the Water Action Agenda in terms of pushing forward faster?
Yeah, thank you. I think that I'll touch on a comment made earlier about integration, because PepsiCo, like many companies, we have a fairly robust water agenda, but it's that, right? I refer to it as the water agenda, not the nature agenda, right? There's climate work over here. And so I think the more holistic we can be in our approach, in our thinking, the more inclusive we might also be as well. And frankly, I think that's a really critical factor in accelerating and in scaling the work that is already happening. We know that work happening at the watershed level, including work that PepsiCo is implementing, is good, is important, is having an impact, but we need to do much more, and we need to be scaling those efforts up to a full watershed scope of efforts and not thinking of them exclusively as a water quantity effort, as in the case of, in our case, in many companies, a replenishment program, but realizing when efforts are nature-based solutions, they have an impact on society, they have an impact on the economy, on biodiversity, on all aspects of water, depending upon the intervention. And so I think there's a real opportunity to leverage that focus of integration, of measuring the diverse impacts, and that can then invite diverse actors into the conversation and ultimately into, hopefully, implementation as well.
I think what Tanya touched upon earlier in terms of taxonomy and everyone speaking the same language becomes really critical here, to bring alignment, to bring kind of a 360 perspective that you say is going to be important for industry as well as the other stakeholders. And Tanya, I want to come back to you to say, what were the best practices that came out of the Water Action Agenda and ID2, and what would you like to see scaled up?
Well, I think the few major points that we heard there, of course, strengthen integrated water resources management. It's nothing new, but it really needs still a lot of work, integrated planning and policymaking. The second is resource efficiency and reuse, which should become the norm in all economic sectors. And this includes, as a priority, improving agricultural water use efficiency. We've heard from one of the speakers that only 12% of the Water Action Agenda commitments dealt with water and agriculture, and this should be addressed. The third recommendation was on the protection and restoration of ecosystems, which is, of course, essential, not just for the water cycle, but also for the global biodiversity framework implementation. And here I would like to mention one of the EU commitments for the Water Action Agenda. It's the Nature Restoration Act, which aims to protect and restore forests, wetlands, and marine ecosystem, and has legally binding targets of 30% by 2030. And there was the Sustainable Urban Development recommendation with integrated urban and territorial planning with nature-based solutions, possibly. We learned that lesson during the catastrophic floods in Slovenia a few weeks ago. And I would like to also mention that the European Green Deal has the logic of integrated policymaking as its DNA. The implementation of water, energy, food ecosystems is recognized one of the priorities by the EU, and not only in the international fora, but also through financing of cooperation projects. Just to mention Team European initiatives, we have the bilateral and the regional one, and just to give an example, we have a Team Europe initiative on the water and energy nexus in Central Asia, and a bilateral one on water and food with Egypt. And one more thing I would like to mention, where I see what would be the best solution for achieving this integration of policies on the EU level is the need to have an EU strategy on water. We have many strategies on circular economy, on hydrogen. We don't have an EU strategy on water.
Mary Beth, I'm going to come to you because, of course, you've heard lots of coalitions, stakeholder engagements, what is being done from the public sector. What do you want to see coming out of the private sector discussions from the Water Action Agenda, and what do you want to lead on, potentially?
Yeah, I mean, I think the call for the action part of the Water Action Agenda is quite critical. So as much effort as it might take to make a commitment, that is nothing compared to actually moving forward, implementing these particular initiatives. And so lots of conversations around, in particular, the opportunity in agriculture that, interestingly, exactly as you mentioned, Tanya, 12% is completely inadequate compared to the level of impact on water that sector is actually having. And of course, being a food and beverage company, we know that firsthand. And we are critically focused, certainly on water efficiency in the regions where we are sourcing our key crops. We have regenerative agriculture programs, but what we realize we need to amplify is increased focus on the watershed and increased focus beyond our own sourcing regions as well. And so a newer initiative that we are working on is working in the watershed of those key sourcing regions, but not with PepsiCo suppliers. Working with the neighboring communities, farmers, those that are not our suppliers today, because the recognition that that is a resource that is for that entire community, that entire ecosystem, I think there needs to be a lot more of that happening. And certainly our hope with this initiative is that we are bringing together that diverse set of stakeholders. We are working with local communities, we are working with the government, we are working with other private sector actors to think holistically and get beyond the bounds of our own operational footprint, of our own sourcing or supply chain. And again, I would go back to thinking more holistically to be increasingly inclusive in those efforts as well.
I think it would make a lot of people happy to hear what you have to say and what Tanya is saying as well, which is that we want to broaden the scope. The only way to go forward is to broaden the scope so we can work together and to have a 360 inclusive engagement with the question. And that brings me to Tanya. In terms of what we've heard yesterday and today about inclusion, in terms of doing things differently, not business as usual, we have to be inclusive. You bring an Indigenous person's perspective to the discussion. And in terms of water security, in terms of changing the framework and pivoting from where we've been, what would you like to see included now?
So first of all, I want to acknowledge that I see more interest on Indigenous people's knowledge on Indigenous people's issues. I think what is clear and what we're learning with the different crises that we are facing is that the champions of resilience are Indigenous peoples as we safeguard 80% of the world's remaining biodiversity, even though we represent only the 6% of the world's population. Here we are in territory of the Sami people, and many people might call hostile many of the environments where Indigenous peoples live. How is that they can live in the Arctic, in frozen lands, or how is that they have managed to live in the sub-Saharan Africa, where we could say it's super dry or arid, or how is that the Senu people has managed to have water management practices that allows them to cope with floodings for over 8 months, right? So, but to answer to your question, what is that we expect? Rather than reinventing the wheel, to all of you that are water practitioners, I would invite you to look at what is working already, the solutions that Indigenous peoples have put in place. Support them with these practices, but also, as we are practitioners and developing many of these solutions, I invite you to think of rights. I invite you to, if you want to implement anything, to don't do it at the expenses of Indigenous peoples, because we are seeing a growing criminalization of Indigenous peoples. Respect the prior, free, and informed consent. Thirdly, as we have been committed to the sustainability of the planet, we are happy to share our game-changing solutions, but we need a seat at the table. And particularly, I want to thank the government of the Netherlands, because during the UN Water Conference, as well as Tajikistan, we didn't see a lot of inclusion at the beginning with Indigenous peoples, but it was thanks to the different dialogues with all of you that we started to have that seat at the table, and we need to see that increasing. Just to conclude in a more practical way, linking this to the recent United Nations Food Systems Summit, we have a coalition on Indigenous peoples' food systems. We are working in different issues, as many of you have seen that water is holistic and we should not work on silos. I invite you to look at what we're doing with the coalition. We have 7 governments. We work with UN agencies, with Indigenous peoples across the world. And if you want to learn more about our work, there's going to be many sessions during this conference. SIWI, thank you. We have a delegation, I think, of over 30 people, Indigenous peoples around the world. So talk to us and see how we can collaborate. We're here to collaborate. Thank you.
I think that's amazing. Talk to you, basically give you a seat at the table, and of course look at what's being done. I think that's a very strong message to send to the audience and to take on board in light of the communications and stakeholder engagement that needs to happen for water. What we're going to do now is actually open up to the audience and to ask them to ask you a question. So I'm going to ask for an audience question. Oh.
Hi, I'm Thomas Rubmark. I'm at the Swedish Waterhouse at SIWI, and thank you for a very, very interesting discussion and dialogue. Listening to you, and finding ourselves all in this room and everywhere under the pressure to actually act, which has been clear. How can we balance private and public interest equitably to create a sound economic environment for progress? What's your perspective on that?
Who would that question be to?
Actually, to all three.
To all three, okay. Let's start.
I'm sorry, could you repeat? Because there's a lot of echo that we hear on stage. So if maybe Arit could repeat your question.
what I heard was the role of the public and private sector.
The question was, how can we balance private and public interests equitably to create a sound economic environment for progress? Did it come
How to balance private and public sector interests equitably? Well, I think Tanya heard, she just is breathing heavily.
It's a tough one. But I would see that, you know, the most effective way would be to bring in, you know, multiple stakeholders. So it's not just a dialogue between the public and private sector, because here you know, I don't think we're going to get to a great balance, but you need to bring in also the, you know, the civil society, the scientists, the experts. Otherwise, this will be a very difficult balance to achieve. Indigenous knowledge, people science, etc. So inclusive, multi-stakeholder dialogues, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with that and had a very similar train of thought. I don't think it's just about public and private sector, although there are plenty of opportunities among any two individual sectors, but agree, bringing in those diverse perspectives, that's when you can drive an agenda forward. And ultimately, what I think is oftentimes we see getting bogged down in the nuances, in the timeline, in this specific geographic location, but to come to alignment of the ultimate objective first, I think that tends to be helpful when you can bring those stakeholders together. And then when you enter those conversations and you reach a roadblock, to remember, okay, what is the ultimate goal? And you can start to strip away some of those seemingly competing priorities and be able to move forward. And I mean, even if we're looking in the private sector alone, right, this is a challenge, but we have figured out on the water agenda to work with our competitors, because at the end of the day, we have that mutual objective that we're working towards. And I think it can't be entirely different from that, even when you broaden the scope to a diverse group of stakeholders.
Tanya.
I think this is a challenging question, but yes, I would agree that we need a better actors' involvement. I'm not going to say stakeholders, because as Indigenous peoples, we always take the stand that we are right holders, because we have to think about rights. We have to speak about rights. And yes, we can create equitable development, but everyone should have a seat at the table, and it should be the people speaking about themselves, not someone else. And I'm saying this just because many people has spoken about Indigenous peoples or done development on Indigenous territories without really including Indigenous peoples. And we need a more meaningful and inclusive participation.
Thank you all so much. That message is clear. Inclusion and moving beyond the scope of sight right now is where we need to be. Thank you all so much for being with us today. Join me, giving them a warm hand of applause. I encourage everyone online in the room to prepare for the next round of questions after the next ID segment as well. And I invite Claudia to take over.
Thank you, Arati, for those insightful conversations. And just to continue the discussion, I'll welcome the segment 3, Water for Climate, Resilience and Environment. And I would like to welcome Her Excellency Dr. Hani Sewulam to the panel. He's Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation of the Arab Republic of Egypt. Thank you. Ms. Chiara Colombo, Policy Engagement Advisor, International Water Management Institute. And Ms. Paola Albrito, Director of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, starting, I believe an official theme of these conversations has been integration and breaking silos, so I would like to jump straight to it with Dr. Hani. What practical examples demonstrate integrated governance and at scale And how can we advance this for related outcomes, including climate adaptation and nature-based solutions?
Thank you very much for this very interesting session. Speaking on behalf of a water-scarce country, a country that has only 50% of the water that needed for reaching the water poverty line, I think governance is a very important keyword that we have to speak about today. And we in Egypt, speaking of practical examples, we have been changing the regulatory framework over the previous couple of years. So we even changed the water law in Egypt in order to accommodate some of the very important aspects like stakeholders dialogue, stakeholders involvement in the water management. So today we are able to have a multi-layers of stakeholders, starting from the water user associations, going to the associations that bring the people, stakeholders of the branch canals, and then to the governorate level, up to the decision makers level, and the Prime Minister is even leading that level when we speak about water. And this really has helped us a lot to come to very interesting solutions, especially speaking of bottom-up approach, solutions that are coming from the local community, solutions that are coming from the water user associations. I can just take one of the nature-based solutions that came up in the last year in one of the very interesting, that the local community in the northern coast of Egypt has came up with the idea on how to protect their areas from the sea level rise in the Mediterranean Sea and use the local materials, using kind of local bamboos, trees, in order to, with a stone, in order to, when the sand moves, start building a kind of plateaus that protect their community from the sea. You can visit this project. It's now extending to almost 70 kilometers across the northern coast of Egypt, protecting the local communities from the sea level rise. And that's for us a wonderful project, thanks to the GCF, of funding this project. It's a Green Climate Fund project that's really showed that stakeholders' involvement could lead to a nature-based solutions.
Thank you very much. And I think from the last panel as well, it's impossible to talk about nature-based solutions without including the local communities and the indigenous communities as well. I want to jump to Chiara. And since the second panel touched on the importance of agriculture as well, what opportunities can we capitalize on to strengthen convergence between intergovernmental process for water of food and agriculture?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. I think, so one of what I think is one of the greatest challenges of the future is how do we ensure food production for an increasing, growing population in a changing climate context. So that's, and we do that also by bringing together the water community with not only the agriculture one, but the food systems community. And that's because we are not very good at speak to each other. So we need to start really, we need to start by a real, honest dialogue among ourselves. And I say this because sometimes we, so the two communities understand water differently. So from the agriculture and food systems perspective, water is a sort of an input. Normally it's intended as irrigated water, whereas for us is this, well, we're all here for the same reason, is this interconnecting force, and it is an existential threat and risk to food production. So I think that really talking to each other is a starting point. And one testament of that is the fact that water was not embedded in the, so that was mentioned before, in the UN Food Systems Summit enough. And at the same time, food is not as present, so food systems are not as present, for instance, in the water conference. We heard at the beginning that only 12% of the water of the commitments are on agriculture, and so that needs to be changed. I also think that this is a particularly important year where we can try to bridge those communities together. And also because this year's World Food Day is going to be on water. We have COP28, and I really want to thank also the efforts of His Excellency last year in COP27. But we have COP28 that coming ahead of us, and we know that the presidency is working very hard to bring water and food systems together. So I think that the future, the Summit of the Future, the SDG Summit, so I think that we also need to be present in those different fora so that our voice is heard.
Thank you very much. And talking a little bit about the Water Action Agenda, can we get some practical examples of the linking water, climate, and resilience and environment within this Water Action Agenda?
Yeah, I think integration was one of the very important keywords that was said today when it comes to resilience, climate, and water. But also decoupling is very important keyword. I think one of the very interesting outputs from the Interactive Dialogue 3 that happened during the UN Water Conference that we had the honor to co-chair with the Japanese government, it was decoupling water consumption from economic growth. So we have to find ways to activate what we have been talking about since different years, producing more with less, increasing and growing the economy and pushing the economy to grow with less water resources. That's the decoupling aspect that we would like to focus on. And I think this is a very important result from the UN Water Conference. In Egypt, to be more practical, we have been working intensively in producing more crops per drop. In vertical growing, so per unit area, we would like to produce more crop per unit area. We are not only moving to drip and sprinkler irrigation, we are moving to super intensive food production using recirculating aquaculture system or hydroponics, aquaponics. All these are very interesting examples. But on the other hand, integration is also important in the sense of water, energy, food nexus. We need more water in countries like Egypt. We have to find sources, and what else except recirculating and reuse the agriculture drainage. We have been using 21 billion cubic meter of the agriculture drainage water and recycling it 1 and 2 or 3 times. But also desalination is the future for all of us. Desalination is still not a green technology, so we have to green desalination, and we have to attract the interest of the industry on that. When the industry was interested in solving the energy problem, PV systems or photovoltaic has moved or the price is reduced by 90% over only 10 years. This revolution has to happen also in the water sector. Desalination has to receive more attention so that we can reduce the price of cubic meter by 90% over the coming 5 to 10 years. This must happen, and this will not happen without greening desalination, will not happen without integrating desalination and with solar energy and producing food out of such integration to have the water, energy, food nexus as one of the solutions for the future of water scarcity. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, innovation is fundamental, but also the enabling environment of legislation that you mentioned in your previous answer. I think it's fundamental to be able to get this technology working once we have it. Same question, I would say to you. How can we link these different topics within the Water Action Agenda?
So I think the Water Agenda is a great tool. I also think that all the organizations that have submitted a commitment, they have to stick to that commitment and they have to implement. We cannot wait the UN system to tell us what to do, we have to act on those commitments and show that we are engaged and show that we're committed. I can bring you the example that the International Water Management Institute is doing. So we submitted a commitment that is called Transformative Futures Water Security. And we held, and this is truly a bottom-up approach, future-looking process with youth very much engaged. We wanted youth to be engaged because they are they have in per se the future and the present, so they will be here in the future. And we held 8 regional dialogues. From those dialogues and from like a global event, we came up with 8 missions. And the idea is truly to rally around those missions, to create the convergence around those missions. They're very interconnected, but they help also as a way of pushing forward. And what was said also earlier, to see what's already happening in the context, it's essential. We don't have to duplicate, we don't have to fragment, we have to converge, we have to align towards common goals.
Perfect, thank you. And Paula, sorry to have left you out a little bit here, but now it's your time to give your reflections. And the UNDRR has made a commitment to put water in the heart of climate action, and I would like to know how that's going and if you have any thoughts on.
Thank you very much for that. And allow me just to comment also on what I've heard from the opening up to now. I think we have to be positive, we have to chase opportunity, and we have to continue really working hand in hand. And this is a very important element, whether we're talking about water, disaster risk reduction, environment, climate, is all connected. So let's really continue working together, not only for the next SDG summit, but for the future in very practical terms. For me, there are 3 key actions that need to happen, and all of us have been touching over it. First one is the strengthening of risk-informed governance. Why? Because that is going to be allowing precisely what I said, the possibility for risk agenda, the climate agenda, the environment agenda to come together through consideration of water hazards. Building a partnership and joining hands is the only way to succeed. 9 out of 10 disasters are due to water hazards. The destruction of these disasters are huge, whether you're looking at losing life, societal capacity to cope, infrastructure. So what we need to be able to do is actually to pool funding and to see joint programming that will allow to bring these international agendas together. And the third element that is fundamentally important is the all of society and all of government approach. This is an issue of fairness, as we heard, and an issue of equitable progression of our society. And it is a given. We need to ensure that people that are at risk and the local community are engaged in this project, program, and move forward in implementing the agenda. Now, walking the talk and referring to the water at the heart of climate action, indeed, really thanking the Netherlands for the vision and the commitment. This is part of our common commitment with UNDRR, WMO, IFRC, the Netherlands Red Cross and SOF, in order to see how we can pull these different elements that I just mentioned together. We do have a focus that are 4 countries in Africa, and we're really looking at the water hazards through the climate and risk perspective with a community-led implementation. So this is something that is in progress, that we really see not only continue in progress, but expanding. We hope that this initiative is going to be a suggestion for this way of acting to become a reality also in other regions and in other countries. I would have another very important example, which is in Canada, but I understand that time is a challenge. But just to say that there isn't only one example, there are good things happening out there.
Thank you very much, and I'll be sure to look up that example later as well. I would like to open up the floor for if we have any audience questions. I don't know the mic. Yes.
Thank you so much for the debate. My name is Ralph. I'm a graduate in agricultural economics. One of the things that I noticed from Chiara is that irrigation plays a tremendous role in water consumption. There is a lot of talk about nature-based solutions. One thing that I find missing in the debates and in the narrative, so to speak, is the discussions on market-based solutions. We've seen that in Australia. They have done something that looked like a stock market-like system. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on, could you have some sort of water management system that is something like that for the water market design? Thank you.
I'm sorry, there is truly an echo here. I didn't get the question.
Could you repeat the
shortly?
Shorter part? I think it was market-based solutions.
Yes, market-based solutions as an alternative to nature-based solutions.
Can you elaborate more on market-based?
You mean in agriculture, like smallholder farmers? Okay, so EB is doing a lot on that. So they are trying to, they're looking at, especially in, we have like a great office in South Africa. I can introduce you to, she's here, our lead in South Africa. So they're also looking at how they can put in contact smallholder farmers with a sort of a market system and create like a sort of a resilient supply chain all along, so from production and then from table, let's say. So those are examples that are there, and we're working on that. And it's truly how you put in contact, how you set those networks that sometimes are not there, and how you fund for that, and how you create like a sustainable system. And a system where all the different actors are heard and are working together so that that system works in the best way. So those are things that we're looking at and we're working on in various projects, especially in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Thank you very much, and I could listen to your experiences all day, but unfortunately we have a limited time, so I want to thank you, all of you, for joining this panel, and I hope to continue listening to your experience.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And now, to continue with the next segment, Water for Cooperation, I would like to welcome the next panelist, Dr. Mohamed Diatta, coordinator of the Unit for the Follow-up, Promotion, and Popularization of the Recommendations of the 9th World Water Forum, Senegal. Welcome. Dr. Laura Turley, Senior Manager of the Geneva Water Hub, Blue Peace Geneva Water Hub. Thank you. And Ms. Nada Najdalani, Palestine Director, EcoPeace Middle East. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us here, and I would like to start with a very pointed question for Dr. Diatta. What were the main messages of the interactive dialogue number 4, and what commitments has Senegal made as part of the Water Action Agenda on the theme of cooperation?
Thank you, Moderator. I'm French speaker, but I will do my best with English. Interactive Dialogue 4 provides an opportunity to scale up the profile of water for security. And many messages highlight the fact that cooperation is essential to achieve SDGs and preventing crises. And Senegal highlights also the fact that it's important to make hydro-diplomacy at the top agenda of water. And hydro-diplomacy is important to promoting stability and at different scales. Water must connect all stakeholders, states and territories, but also water must unite us and remain an essential vector for peace, development, and resilience. Political will is essential also to promote progress in water, but we need to include all players from water sectors, but also players outside the water box if we want cooperation to succeed. We saw that cooperation accounts for 13% of the Water Action Agenda proposal. It means that we have a way to go, or if we want to use cooperation as a real game changer. As part of the Water Action Agenda, Senegal is committed to implementing the Blue Deal. The Blue Deal is the main outcome of the 9th World Water Forum and the Dakar Action Plan for rivers, basin, lakes, and aquifers. But also we have a very interesting activities that we have with Mauritania, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Senegal, about transboundary aquifers. This is very important. Aquifers governance are a challenge for the next years. And the last commitment that Senegal will take about the Water Action Agenda is the Coalition for Cooperation on Transboundary Water. This is the main commitment that Senegal took at New York. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, transboundary issues are a worldwide issue, and we would love to also include the youth in these discussions because Absolutely. We have a lot to learn from you, and we have a lot to share as well.
Absolutely.
Dr. Laura, I would like to know a little bit of your reflections on this Water Action Agenda with the cooperation team.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity to share our perspectives. The interactive dialogue 4 was a balanced discussion in that different perspectives on cooperation were brought to the table. It also covered both transboundary cooperation as well as intersectoral cooperation, and we had strong leadership from the co-chairs, Senegal and Switzerland. Some of the key messages coming out of it, which really resonated with us at the Geneva Water Hub, were about the need for cooperation at all levels. So yes, absolutely, cooperation between the some 153 UN member states who share transboundary waters and in many ways have a shared destiny, but then also cooperation within countries vertically, horizontally. Another message that really resonated was the essential role of water cooperation for peace and prosperity more broadly. And that's something that came out of the dialogue too, was this kind of peace function of water cooperation. And then just on the Water Action Agenda, as was just mentioned, I think there was only about 12-13% of the commitments that were maybe kind of covering official sort of water cooperation themes. And we also know there were very low numbers of commitments that were made by governments, and I think those 2 points are connected. But nonetheless, there's still a basis to work from with the Water Action Agenda. It's not going to be limited to the Water Action Agenda. There's still plenty of material to bring in there. And another point is something that we'd like to see more of moving forward under the Water Action Agenda, but also under the SDGs. We see a real absence of discussion on the protection of water, the protection of water systems during armed conflict. So we would like to see more attention on protecting essential water services for people living under conflict or sanctions, such as in Syria, Ukraine, but unfortunately there are many more examples. So especially if we are claiming to be taking action towards leaving no one behind.
Thank you very much. And of course, always these commitments are complicated because they involve so many different actors, and sometimes even the institutional strengthening is needed. So we have someone to be able to do this job within the transboundary basins. And Dr. Mohammed, could you highlight 3 or 4 key recommendations from the Interactive Dialogue 4?
Yes, a number of recommendations were made, but it's important to highlight that it's important to have South-South cooperation, North-North cooperation, scientific cooperation, intersectoral cooperation, if you want that cooperation be successful. But it's important to strengthen basin organization and support their efforts to promote inclusive, sustainable, and integrated water resources by promoting exchange of information, experience, and best practices, but also not forget transboundary aquifers should be the focus of increased attention. Second, strengthening cooperation, particularly at transboundary level, to meet water-related challenges and to ensure sustainable development, regional integration, peace building, and promotion of cooperation with other fields. Third, increase funding for transboundary cooperation and cross-sectoral cooperation by mobilizing additional financial and private funding, such as blended financing. And last but not least, accelerate the establishment of cooperation agreements where they do not exist. These are the key main recommendations that come from out the discussion in New York in Interactive Dialogue 4. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, especially with the transboundary issues, we normally think of them as regional problems, but we can learn so much from South-South cooperation as to how they tackle different, the different issues on the different basins, right?
Absolutely.
And talking about transboundary issues, I would like to ask Nada for a reflection on we could build trust at the transboundary level through data-driven and decision-making on water. What solutions exist for this in the Water Action Agenda, and how can we scale it?
Certainly, there's a lot in the Water Action Agenda on the country level effort that needs to be done in terms of generating data, also the work of UN country teams in terms of working with member states in order to look into the data for sound decision-making, governance, and improving of the water services in those countries. And it also works on or mentions that there needs to be a level of regular intergovernmental dialogue and follow-up on issues that are relevant at a watershed level and approach. However, I find that the Water Action Agenda, and I hope that I was misreading between the lines, that there's really a missing link here towards the securitization and the politicizing of the water issues within conflict areas and how this can be tackled in practical ways. I haven't seen how the danger of commodifying also water in stock market has also implications on countries that have low access to water. So I think there still is hope in terms of the linkages that the Water Action Agenda is putting forward with the SDGs Global Acceleration Framework, the finance, the capacity building, the governance, the utilization of innovation in terms of generating data. If we invest in generating data to inform not only data that is technical by technology in terms of watersheds, availability of underground water or satellite images, there needs to be also investing in data that comes from the society and the local level, the local knowledge, the fears, the practices of also adopting to low access to water conditions. All of this can build basically a dialogue that puts one country in the shoe of the other and understand the realities, and therefore the trust building is not only based on scientific data, it's also based on social data, on local level data. There's one thing that I've learned from my experience here with my colleague Gideon Bromberg, the Israeli director of EcoPeace. We've been invited twice to the UN Security Council to speak about water security and how it can be a measure for building peace and trust between the countries. We have talked twice at the higher level, but we haven't seen the walk really on that level. So we really call for real action on utilizing water as a low-hanging fruit for trust building and peace building.
Thank you very much. And just to go back to Laura with the last question, what is needed to strengthen cooperation in water governance moving forward, and how are we trying to achieve and address these bottlenecks? A very easy question to you.
Yes, thank you. I think we can get better at building a case for cooperation, building a case for water cooperation, right? Because just like integrated water resource management, cooperation is a means to an end. So, you know, why cooperate? What are we moving towards? And for us, anyway, at the Geneva Water Hub, that's very much the why question is about peace. So it's about when water is shared equitably and when water is spared from pollution, spared from conflict, spared from sanctions, then it can be a vector for peace. And so whether it's peace or whether it's water security, you know, what is the goal that we're working towards? And this can help us maintain action and momentum from the countries, but also actors who are already very motivated and who are already taking action, but it can also help us bring on more actors and states because, you know, there's still a lot to be done in terms of convincing many actors that this is important, that water cooperation is important, even though here we are the coalition of the willing. So I think making our arguments about economic, environmental, social benefits of cooperation more strong will help us. And then secondly, I think we're all concerned about the quality of cooperation too. You know, this isn't just the numbers game where we want however many commitments and how many this. We want quality cooperation. And we need it as well in face of the future we're looking into. We need resilient cooperation and agreements. So in order to do that, you know, I think the qualities that we're looking for are certainly inclusivity. So when you're beginning a water process, you know, okay, is everyone at the table? Okay, no, let's take a step back and see what we can do to improve that. And then, of course, processes that are able to ask tough questions, you know, not shying away from big questions about, okay, what are the different versions of equity here? What are different stakeholders bringing to the table in terms of their power and whatnot? And trying to at least bring difficult questions to the table. Yesterday in the opening ceremony, we heard about the challenges of having discussions around allocation, which are huge and important. So yeah, I think all of this, and in conclusion, we need the spaces and platforms for these dialogues where actors feel safe and empowered to share, to build trust, and to work together on common understandings of water challenges. That is something that we are working on at the Geneva Water Hub. We have work that's doing this in the Sahel region, in WANA region, and elsewhere, and it's one of our commitments under the Water Action Agenda.
Thank you very much. Yes, sometimes cooperation can feel like a checklist, but we actually need the commitments and need the results from these dialogues, right?
Yeah.
So thank you very much to the panel for your contributions. And again, the time is limited, but I hope to continue discussing with you later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
And now I hand back the torch to Arati to continue us in this conversation. Thank you very much for attending.
Thank you very
Welcome,
much.
Arati.
I'm going to welcome my panelists on stage. For ID Segment 5, the Water Action Decade, with a very important starting segment of quality cooperation. Before I introduce my panelists, we're going to start with a short video submitted by Her Excellency Ms. Grace Fu, Minister of Sustainability and the Environment from the Government of Singapore.
His Excellency Zapa Korosi, President of the United Nations General Assembly, Excellencies, distinguished delegates at the Stockholm World Water Week. Good day to you from Singapore's latest desalination plant at downtown Marina East. It has been a significant year in the Water Action Decade. We are now at the decade's halfway point. More than 800 Water Action Agenda commitments have been made by the United Nations and international agencies, governments, and non-governmental organizations. These commitments reflect our collective intent to realize SDG 6. More importantly, we must find solutions in implementation. The Stockholm World Water Week's theme of innovation is therefore highly relevant. At the UN Water Conference in March, Singapore had the privilege of co-chairing Interactive Dialogue 5 on the Water Action Decade. In July, we participated in the Water Action Agenda special event at the High-Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development. The theme of innovation ran through both of these discussions and resonated strongly with many. There were calls for different forms of innovation to be considered. And let me share 3 ways we can use innovation to achieve our water sustainability goals. First, we search for game-changing solutions through technological innovation. Singapore managed our water stresses through adoption of water technologies. The 2 most notable are desalination and the recycling of used water into ultra-clean and high-grade reclaimed water, also known as new water. We started research and development as early as the 70s to enhance our water resiliency. Today, these technologies are integral to the new sources of our water supply. We continue to innovate towards our Water Action Agenda commitments. We are innovating to reduce the energy required for desalination to reduce the carbon footprint of our water processes. We are also using technological solutions such as smart water meters, to enable customers to conserve water through greater visibility of consumption and fix leaks promptly to reduce water wastage. Second, we catalyze water sustainability through innovative policies. Singapore adopts many policies to encourage water conservation. We price water to reflect its scarcity and economic value, to elicit the right consumption behavior and finance the water system sustainably. We also put in place regulations to manage water demand. We recently introduced mandatory water recycling requirements for large water users in industrial sectors and work closely with companies to raise their water recycling rates. Third, we encourage innovation in water and bring down costs to scale up implementation. Singapore has seen the benefits of cross-sectoral collaboration. To develop new water, the government worked closely with the research community and industry partners. We also partner international companies to improve the energy efficiency of desalination. This multi-stakeholder approach is reflected in the work of the Global Commission on the Economics of Water, on which one of the co-chairs is from Singapore. The Commission calls for collective action to solve the global water crisis through better governance, usage, and valuation of water. Dear delegates, let this dialogue inspire us with innovation and a common vision to act on our water action agenda. And let us act on our agenda through technology, policy, and collaboration. We must collectively deliver on our commitments to avert a global water crisis and deliver on our goals of SDG 6 of clean water and sanitation for all. Singapore stands ready to cooperate with the rest of the world on water, and we are happy to provide support through our Singapore Cooperation Programme, which has seen close to 150,000 participants in technical and governance courses since its inception. Thank you.
With that inspirational start, I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have Mr. Bernard Koeng-Wah, Assistant Chief Executive, PUB, Singapore's National Water Agency. We have Ms. Elizaveta Demidenko, Partnerships Coordinator for Water, Youth Network and Knowledge Management and Transboundary Water, Global Water Partnership. And we have Leon Capetas, Lead for Climate Resilience and Programs, Europe, Middle East Resilient City Network. With that inspirational start, I must start with you, Bernard. Now, Singapore has done so much. We heard the Minister talk about data, policy, demand management. From researching game-changing solutions, what are some of the outcomes that you've seen from the research Singapore has done?
Very good morning to every one of you. Allow me to echo what Minister Grace Fu has shared in the video recording. Let us then as we put our act together to work on our water action agenda, let us be inspired and work in the total collaboration. Technology and innovation has been really the heart of Singapore's water story over the years. We have invested greatly in R&D and technology, leveraging on technology to overcome our water challenges. Moving forward, we'll continue to do so, to seek innovative solutions to ensure that we strengthen our resilience and in the water system in a very sustainable way. Allow me to share with you some aspects of this. First, we are innovating to reduce the energy and reduce the carbon footprint in our water treatment processes. In Singapore, we have adopted the 3 Rs. We have to replace, reduce, and remove. So we replace the fossil fuel energy with renewable energy like solar. We reduce the energy in our treatment processes, especially in energy-intensive treatment processes like desalination and water reclamation. Thirdly, remove. So we are also looking into carbon capture and utilization solutions that we exploring the potential of nature-based blue carbon solutions, and even capturing carbon dioxide from the ocean. To enhance our water conservation efforts and reduce distribution losses in our water network, we have implemented smart water meters to help households manage their water consumption, set water conservation targets, and detect leaks. We leverage on the network of acoustic sensors to proactively detect the leaks in our network. Through such smart operations, we have achieved a low distribution loss of about 8% and kept the cost of renewing pipeline infrastructure low with targeted replacement. We have introduced mandatory recycling, as shared by my minister, to help reduce water consumption in water-intensive industries. We continue to provide funding support for water recycling projects so as to incentivize more companies to adopt efficient and innovative ways of managing water demand. Next, we collaborate globally, right? And we seek out new innovative solutions. Singapore has benefited from being able to learn from the experiences of others, and we continue to work with industrial partners and researchers globally. So similarly, we would be glad to share our knowledge and experience through technical and capacity building programs such as the Singapore Cooperation Program on WASH that PUB organizes with the UNICEF. Besides partnering our own water industry, we have seen the benefits of collaborating with adjacent industries as well as cross-boundaries collaboration. So our collective goal for water may be ambitious, but it's certainly achievable. Our experience tells us that practical use of technology and a drive for innovation will enable us to have concrete steps forward. We look forward to deepening our cooperation with the stakeholders and accelerate progress towards our goals. With strong partnership and collaboration, we hope that all of us can continue to write our water story together. So with that, thank you.
Thank you so much. Achievable water goals. That's actually what we want to see and hear. And you talked to us about what technology has done for Singapore and given you solutions that are accessible on the ground. But of course, these technology solutions require stakeholder engagement, require access from cities, peri-urban areas, rural areas. We need to collectively engage. And then, Leon, I come to you with that question. How do we do this? How do we take what's happening with stories like Singapore, but now scale solutions that can be accessible to these different areas?
Yeah, thanks first for the invitation to share our perspectives. The challenge here is how we follow through on our commitments to the Water Action Agenda. And we do this, exactly as I said, through multi-level cooperation. So we're setting these global targets, ambitions, commitments, but they're quite strategic and conceptual sometimes. How do we turn this into implementation action, which is hands-on? And that's where all the nitty-gritty work is. So one way to support cities scale is through the development of communities of practice. That's also one of our commitments as a Resilient Cities network, where we bring many cities together who have a high interest on the topic. And that's an opportunity for them to learn from their peers, like from champions like Singapore, and exchange with them. It's much better for a city to learn from another city than just from a technical expert. The same way a water engineer wants to learn from a water engineer, a city wants to learn from a city because they see the challenge from the same perspective. But also through these communities of practice, we do capacity building, and we can connect cities, the right departments. We work usually through our chief resilience officers, but there's a community around him or them. And that's where the capacity building happens. That helps us close the professional gap that we see sometimes, because the water engineer is no longer a person who's there to do some simple hydraulic designs or lay pipes. Nowadays, we're asking them to know about restoration of ecosystems, carbon neutrality, participation. So that's a challenge. And to take it to see how this translates into project implementation, I'd like to give the example of the African Cities Water Adaptation Platform, which is led by WRI, and we've used an approach together with ARUP, the City Water Resilience Assessment or Approach methodology, and that helps them use all these capacities that the cities develop and apply them to understand the water system, the urban water system, see where that fits in the catchment water system, and build water resilience, but through a lens of equity. That's quite important. And that's also a challenge. We really start learning ourselves how to deal with equity. We don't know very well how to engage vulnerable communities. We don't know very well how to work in informal settlements. Sometimes we go there and we see, oh, it's not just a water problem. It's an integrated planning problem. It is a problem of infrastructure planning, including transport, education, energy. So we need to see the full system, and the water is just a part of that. And that's what we're trying to support cities in doing.
I think what you say is really important, and I want to ask Elizaveta to take what you said and expand when you talk about the professional gap, because as our knowledge expands, as we move forward in understanding what needs to be done, we need to also have people to help us get it done on the ground level. Elizaveta, how do we address this professional gap? And we start today's segment with the co-moderation that Claudia and I are doing for intergenerational exchange. Is that an opportunity that you can harness, that we can harness, to actually take the steps that Leon has kind of outlined?
Absolutely, and I'm very grateful that we're having this discussion. And just going back to the thesis about we need to follow up through the multi-level cooperation, this is the same that we have decided will take us forward for the success of the Water Action Decade. Reflecting on the discussions during the Interactive Dialogue 5, we've said that we need to do this intergenerational collaboration to birth a new plan for the action on water and to go forward. And I must say that we've come a long way in terms of the youth engagement, but I also believe that we could do more. And this dialogue is essentially an answer and a tool for us to close this professional gap. There are a couple of reasons for us to continue this, but first and foremost, we cannot deal with the complexity and we cannot embrace it and find new transforming solutions if we don't engage one of the key stakeholder groups. And we've heard many times that we need to start doing things differently, but before you fight something, before you dismantle a system, you need to understand how it works. And if the senior decision makers are not willing or not able to explain how the system works as young professionals, they will simply leave the sector, so we will have a wider gap. So this dialogue needs to continue if we want to build trust And it starts with creating a safe space for youth to have this conversation. Unfortunately, we've seen some challenges with the inclusivity of the space for discussions in New York, and I can see how much it has improved for the Water Week here. Unfortunately, many of your young colleagues were not able to get there physically, so the idea is that while we are seeking the senior experts, it's time for them to seek us too. And secondly, the transformative action needs fuel. So the best way to do that is to feed on the drive and energy that the young people are bringing to the table. The significance of engaging the youth go well beyond their representation. It enriches the decision-making process, and it helps both seniors and young people to understand the trade-offs. Why do they need each other? By including the youth, the strategies that we're talking about, discussing here, can be better in line with the evolving needs of both present and future generation. By the end of the Water Action Decade, those that are named youth today will be implementing the solutions. And finally, doing things differently requires also listening to criticism. I think that innovation is born through disagreement. And who could be better candidate to express a disagreement than those who will be implementing them? But let us also look at the Water Action Agenda commitments. Around 60% of them either refer to youth as means to achieve their goals, or you name youth as their target audience. But only 26 of them come from governments. And we also know that those commitments are voluntary, meaning that we will need to create an accountability mechanism for their implementation. And this demonstrates us once again the integral role that young people play in the success of the Water Action Decades. The action, as you rightly pointed out, will have to come from the local level through incentivizing collective efforts, communities of practice on the ground, which is why we need to bring the youth into the room, sit down, and just listen to each other.
Thank you so much. So what we're hearing today for this last segment is that technology begets collective action, begets youth engagement, and that was going to drive us forward. Thank you all so much for being with us today, and let's give them a round of applause. And with that, as I step off stage with you, I welcome Karen Gardis, Acting Executive Director, SIWI, for the closing remarks.
Thank you, Arti, and thank you all the panelists. Again, thank you also for those staying on over time. Obviously, the fire alarm was an unplanned event. But I think the discussions have been incredibly rich. And as we've heard, I think the outcomes of the UN Water Conference have been significant. They have been historic achievements for the global water agenda. And I would say for sustainable development at large. And that's maybe where I am a little bit puzzled by the fact that the interventions by the UN system were focusing very much on SDG 6. While I think the panel's discussions have demonstrated exactly the fact that this is much beyond SDG 6. It's about integration. It's about capturing all of the other sectors. And I think that is something that we need to push, to continue, and to encourage those discussions. And one of SIWI's commitments in the Water Action Agenda was precisely that, to facilitate those cross-sectoral, cross-departmental, etc. Discussions. So please keep that in mind. This is also a message to the UN system. Embrace the diversity, embrace the cross-sectoral cooperation. I think that is very, very needed. And I think that the title of the 5 interactive dialogues are really a good structure for these discussions to happen beyond SDG 6. So I think we have the elements there, but we need to deliver on it. I also want to conclude perhaps with a more passionate, I would say, call for action. I think perfect can sometimes be the enemy of the good. And I would encourage each and everyone to not wait for the perfect UN system-wide strategy on water, to not wait for an EU strategy on water, to not wait for the perfect policy by this or that actor or governmental authority or water utility or whoever the stakeholder is. Let's test, let's do, let's learn, let's review, evaluate, and then adapt and redo and retest. And it's in those conversations and it's in that implementation that we have an opportunity to really make those progresses and also leapfrog in some instances by sharing those experiences. So I think this is a call for everyone to take the opportunities such as World Water Week that SIWI is committed to continue to offer as a platform for these kind of discussions, to have those discussions. Can we test this? How do we do it? Okay, let's try, let's evaluate, and let's be brave also in making the financial resources available to carry out those tests and those pilots, and then scale up those that really deliver the results that we want and that we need. So I would like to really thank the brilliant panelists that we've had. Also thank the brilliant co-moderators that we had in today's high-level session. And again, I encourage you, the coffee break I think is still out there waiting for us to join. But thank you so much for your attention at today's high-level panel. We have a lot of work to do. Let's get going. Thank you so much.